They never left the church. Their voices were the last thing anyone heard. 50 children singing hymns in perfect unison, unaware that their innocence was about to be harvested. Imagine it a Sunday morning, light streaming through stained glass windows, the sound of bells calling families to worship. But by dusk, 50 seats at 50 dinner tables sat empty, plates growing cold, candles burning down to nothing. No trace, no footprints, no bodies. Just silence so suffocating that it spread like a disease through the town, leaving parents on their knees, clawing at the earth as if the answers had been buried beneath it. And yet, this is not just a story of missing children. It is the story of how power wears a mask, how institutions hide their sins beneath scripture, how corruption rewrites itself as holiness. Those children vanished not because of chance, not because of some wandering predator, but because something older, something darker, had been built into the very walls of that sanctuary. You were told churches are safe, sacred. But what if I told you that across history, churches have also been fortresses of control, prisons of the mind, and feeding grounds for hidden appetites? What if I told you that entire generations were shaped not by faith, but by fear, engineered through rituals, symbols, and subtle manipulations designed to bind a community not to God, but to those who claim to speak in His name? That day, when the 50 children entered the church, they entered a cage disguised as a house of worship. The hymnals were their lullaby, the sermon their sedation, the cross above them a key turned in the lock of a door they would never escape. And what happened beneath that roof was not random evil. It was a ritual, calculated and precise, echoing practices buried deep in the forbidden history of religion. Practices meant to harvest not only bodies, but souls. You were never supposed to hear this. That's why the archives are empty, the records destroyed, the names erased. Because if men knew what truly happened in that church, if they understood the machinery of manipulation hidden behind stained glass, they would tear every steeple from the sky and salt the ground beneath it. So I will ask you only once, do you want to keep walking in daylight? Or do you want to follow me into the shadows, where the truth will scar you, but also set you free? The first lie you were told is that this was an isolated tragedy. One church, one town, one Sunday morning. But isolation is a myth. What happened to those 50 children is part of a pattern, an ancient current running beneath centuries of ritual. Look closer, and you will see the same structure repeated in cathedrals, temples, mosques, and shrines: the gathering of the young, the binding of innocence to authority, the quiet rewriting of memory under the guise of worship. It was never just about belief. It was about control. Do you understand how easy it is to erase a generation, not by killing them outright, but by consuming their identity, by pulling them into ceremonies where they are told what to sing, what to recite, when to kneel, when to rise? Each command is a thread, each repetition a chain. The children in that church were already prisoners long before their disappearance, because every word they spoke was planted, every gesture rehearsed. They did not belong to themselves. They belonged to the system that claimed them. And then came the day of the harvest. No warnings, no alarms. Parents believed the church walls were unbreachable, that sanctuary meant safety, but what they did not know, what they could not even imagine, was that the sanctuary was the trap itself. That morning, doors shut not to keep intruders out, but to keep the children in, windows sealed, torches extinguished, and beneath the floorboards a chamber. A place built not for worship, but for disappearance. The elders told the town it was Satan, that the devil had stolen the children in a single, monstrous act. But tell me, what kind of devil builds hidden chambers beneath a church? What kind of devil has access to the baptismal records, the attendance logs, the names of every child present that morning? Not a devil that comes from outside, a devil that was already inside, draped in robes, standing at the altar. This is why you were taught to fear shadows instead of institutions. Because if men ever realized the predators were the ones leading the prayers, everything would collapse. Kings, priests, judges, bankers, the same faces wearing different masks across the ages. They do not serve faith, they serve the machinery of power. And those 50 children, they were not just victims. They were offerings. Listen closely, because this is where most men stop paying attention. The story of 50 vanished children is not just a story of bodies lost. It is a blueprint for how power enslaves the mind. Long before they disappeared, the church had trained them in obedience, in submission, in the quiet terror of expectation. Every hymn, every prayer, every hand raised at the proper time was a lesson in compliance. And compliance is the most dangerous cage of all, because it is invisible. Power does not need chains when it can twist belief into shackles. And these children, small, trusting, and eager to please, were being forged into vessels of obedience without knowing it. Each repetition of ritual, each whisper of moral certainty, each sermon invoking sin and divine wrath was a thread tightening around their awareness. By the time the doors closed on that final Sunday, their minds were already mapped, their will already claimed. What you must understand is that this is not unique to one place or one era. Across the globe, religious systems have been built on the same principle: selection, indoctrination, and extraction. Selection of the young, indoctrination through repetition and fear, extraction of obedience, labor, and sometimes life itself. History is littered with hidden chambers beneath temples and churches, with records erased, witnesses silenced, and atrocities rationalized as divine will. And men who survived these systems, if they survived at all, carried scars they could not articulate because the truth is unspeakable. And now, as you hear this, you must ask yourself how many of us are living in invisible cages today. How many obey rules, recite words, follow rituals, all the while believing we are free? That is what makes the story of these 50 children so dangerous to hear. It is a mirror, a reflection of how authority can harvest innocence, bending it to agendas hidden in plain sight. By the end of this tale, you will see exactly how far the roots of this corruption run, and why silence has been the most effective weapon. You will understand that what happened in that church was not a single crime, but a method, a template, a warning. And if you choose to ignore it, the machinery will continue to harvest the unthinking generation after generation, hidden behind the sacred. And now, take a breath. Remember this phrase in your mind and write it down in the comments twice. I see the hidden hand. Twice. This locks your awareness. Your eyes are opening, and you are stepping into a place where very few men dare to walk. You've already felt it. The weight of the unseen, the sense that the world you were taught to trust is a carefully constructed illusion. What happened to those 50 children was not a random act of cruelty. It was orchestrated, coordinated, and enabled by forces that thrive in shadows. The men at the altar were the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them, networks of influence stretched through the town, the county, the state. Hidden bureaucrats, advisors, financiers, and silent enforcers, all aligned to protect the machinery. Power does not tolerate disruption. And when you begin to scratch the surface of events like this, you realize there are always layers designed to hide the truth. The church claimed authority from God, but real authority comes from fear, secrecy, and loyalty enforced by generations. These networks do not appear on maps or in textbooks. They exist in whispers, in coded correspondence, in the selective distribution of information. They are invisible to those who accept the surface of things, yet omnipresent to those who understand patterns. Consider this: records vanish, witnesses die or are silenced. Accusations are dismissed, labeled as hysteria or misunderstanding. The machinery protects itself, and the town continues to sing hymns on Sunday morning, unaware or unwilling to confront that the same forces are still at work. And these forces are ancient. They have perfected the art of deception, feeding on obedience while maintaining the illusion of sanctity. The children were just one small collection of lives sacrificed to the system, but the methods have persisted across centuries. What you are learning now is dangerous knowledge because it challenges everything you think you know about morality, authority, and safety. When you see power as it truly operates, it is neither benevolent nor neutral. It is strategic, calculated, obsessively protective of itself, and it will not hesitate to consume whatever is necessary, whether innocence, trust, or even life, to ensure its survival. The deeper truth is this: those 50 children are more than a crime. They are a signal, a pattern repeated throughout history wherever institutions assert unquestioned authority. From temples in ancient civilizations to modern churches cloaked in charity and piety, the same mechanics are in play. And once you recognize this, you can no longer unsee it. You are awake now, and the system knows that awareness is dangerous. By understanding these networks, you begin to see the invisible threads that control your own world. And the more you see, the more you understand how deeply the machinery has been allowed to entrench itself. Now you begin to see the machinery in motion, the invisible levers that bend minds without breaking them outright. The children in that church were not simply rounded up, they were trained. Not in math or reading, but in submission. Each ritual, each hymn, each gesture reinforced a single lesson: obedience is safety, obedience is sanctity, obedience is survival. And make no mistake, obedience can be harvested, measured, and exploited. Think about it. Imagine a child, 8 or 9 years old, eager to please, desperate to earn the approval of those in power. Every sermon primes the mind: guilt for transgression, fear for rebellion, shame for curiosity. Every hymn sinks heartbeats and minds into a collective rhythm, a subtle hypnosis that teaches conformity. When you combine repetition, authority, and emotional intensity, you create a mind that acts not out of choice, but out of programmed reflex. That is the true power of ritual, not in what is said, but in what is silently enforced. In that church, the children's innocence was not only protected, it was weaponized. They were trained to obey, trained to fear, trained to internalize the authority of the system above all else. By the time the doors closed for the final time, the trap had already been set months, even years before, in the softest whispers, the gentlest instructions, the invisible chains of routine. And when the chamber beneath the floor swallowed them, their minds were already mapped for compliance, their spirits cataloged for exploitation. Understand this: psychological control is not always violent. Its most terrifying form is subtle, invisible, and deeply seductive. It teaches loyalty to the system, even at the expense of self-preservation. It teaches that questioning is sin, defiance is corruption, and obedience is holiness. That is why these children never stood a chance. They had been transformed into vessels for a power they could not see. This is why men in positions of authority have always feared knowledge. Knowledge breaks chains. Awareness disrupts ritual. Truth is the only weapon that can undo centuries of conditioning. And now, as you hear this, you are already crossing a threshold. You are beginning to feel the weight of insight, the unease of understanding that obedience can be manufactured and innocence can be harvested without anyone noticing. And so I ask you again, take a moment and write in the comments twice the phrase, "I see the hidden hand." Twice. This is not mere repetition. It is a lock, a seal, a declaration that you are now awake to the machinery of control that has always existed around you. To understand the atrocity that stole 50 children, you must trace its roots farther than most dare to look. Centuries before that church stood, ancient civilizations practiced rituals designed to bind the innocent to authority. Temples in Mesopotamia, pyramids in Egypt, even early synagogues and Roman sanctuaries all bear traces of a dark principle: innocence is a resource, and power thrives when it is harvested. These were not random rites. They were systems, carefully designed, methodical, and terrifyingly effective. The forbidden knowledge of the past was never meant for the masses. It was reserved for initiates, scribes, and priests who understood the mechanics of fear, manipulation, and control. They knew that obedience could be trained, compliance cultivated, and loyalty extracted without a sword ever being drawn. The children of that church were simply the modern continuation of a methodology that dates back millennia, a blueprint for using innocence as a tool, a shield, and sometimes a sacrifice. This is why history is never as innocent as it appears. Stories of saints, martyrs, and divine justice often cloak the mechanisms of exploitation. The church you trusted may call itself a refuge, but the patterns beneath its teachings echo the chambers of ancient power. Each ritual performed, each promise of salvation, each declaration of sin is a lesson in control, inherited from ancestors who understood that power is maintained not through fear alone, but through the subtle, almost invisible shaping of the mind. Consider this: civilizations that built empires on the backs of children did so not because they were cruel, but because they were strategic. Knowledge is power, yes, but the minds of the young are the most fertile ground for planting obedience. Every era has its own chamber beneath the visible world, every generation its own silent harvest. And while names, dates, and records may be erased, the method persists. passed down like a virus, hidden in ritual, invisible to those who refuse to see. This is why the story of those 50 children is far more than a crime. It is a continuation of a lineage of forbidden knowledge, a lineage that teaches us the rules of power, the price of obedience, and the fragility of innocence. And it is a warning, not just of what men can do, but of what institutions can engineer, unnoticed generation after generation. You are no longer on the outside. You are seeing the current beneath the river of history, the hidden undercurrents that carry human lives toward the maw of control. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The path you are on is dangerous, but necessary, because knowledge is the only armor against being harvested yourself. By now, you understand that the atrocity of 50 vanished children was not spontaneous. It was a system, a network of enforcers, rules, and invisible hands, all designed to maintain control. The men in the robes were only the visible actors. Beneath them, a web of administrators, clerics, and loyal families ensured that nothing would disrupt the plan. Letters vanished. Witnesses were hushed. Doubt was punished. The institution itself became both the shield and the sword, protecting the perpetrators and maintaining the illusion of sanctity. Institutional manipulation operates like a machine. Every cog, every gear, every pulse of authority is designed to sustain itself. Rituals ensure compliance. Records ensure erasure. Loyalty ensures silence. Even those who wield power are often trapped within the system, addicted to the control it grants, convinced that they are upholding righteousness. They do not see themselves as villains. They see themselves as the guardians of order. And that is what makes them most dangerous. They are willing to consume innocence to maintain a hierarchy they consider sacred. These enforcers are experts in perception. They control what the public sees, hears, and believes. They dictate the narratives of morality, shaping guilt, shame, and fear to their advantage. A missing child is explained away. A suspicious pattern is buried under doctrine. A scandal is reframed as divine mystery. And when the truth is glimpsed by a daring few, it is dismissed as paranoia, insanity, or moral corruption. This is how obedience is engineered, not through force alone, but through control of perception. And the deeper you look, the more disturbing it becomes. These methods are not relics of the past. They are active today, refined over centuries, replicated wherever human behavior can be bent to the will of those who claim authority. The children in that church were not the first victims, and they will not be the last, unless someone wakes to the truth and refuses the machinery's programming. You are standing now in the shadow of that machinery. You can feel it in the silences, in the records that were erased, in the absence of justice. And with awareness comes responsibility. Understanding the system's mechanics is not enough. You must recognize its enforcers, its networks, and its invisible levers of obedience, because knowledge alone is a shield, but action is the weapon that protects what is precious. Now you begin to see the full horror. The machinery of control does not only steal bodies, it steals minds. Those 50 children were not only taken, they were reshaped, molded into compliance long before their final disappearance. Fear, ritual, and repetition fused into a psychological architecture designed to crush curiosity, to replace individuality with obedience. They learned to surrender their will without realizing it. Their innocence was transformed into a tool, their trust weaponized. Survivors of such systems, if any remain, carry scars that are invisible but no less real. Obedience becomes instinct. Doubt becomes guilt. Curiosity becomes danger. And when trauma is combined with ritual, with symbolism, with the constant reinforcement of authority, it creates a new reality. A reality in which the victim no longer questions the system, because to question is to destabilize the very framework that has defined them since birth. This is the essence of psychological control, to make the unnatural seem natural, the unjust seem sacred. It is subtle, invisible, almost intimate. It whispers to the mind, obey, believe, conform. And even if the victim escapes the chamber, the church, or the town, the influence lingers. Years later, they may carry the imprint of that obedience in every decision, every belief, every act of trust. The system has harvested their identity, and it rarely returns it. And this is the lesson the powerful want to hide. The true crime is not always in the visible act. It is in the architecture of control itself. 50 bodies may disappear, but the psychological imprint spreads like a virus. Communities are reshaped, generations are silenced, and compliance becomes encoded into the very culture, disguised as faith, morality, or tradition. By understanding this, you begin to glimpse the magnitude of the deception. It is not enough to mourn the missing. It is not enough to condemn the visible perpetrators. You must recognize the invisible forces, the rituals, the subtle reinforcements that make obedience natural, that make horror tolerable, that allow evil to persist unseen. And now, if you have followed me this far, repeat it in the comments again. Twice, I see the hidden hand. Twice, this is not ritual. It is recognition, a declaration that your mind has begun to awaken, that you are no longer a passive observer, and that you are now capable of perceiving the currents that bind the innocent and shape the world without consent. History is a story told by the survivors, or at least by those allowed to survive. But in the case of those 50 children, history itself was rewritten. Records vanished, archives were purged, baptismal logs, attendance sheets, even diary entries, all scrubbed of the inconvenient truth. What remains are whispers, fragments, shadows of evidence hidden in the margins, in letters never meant to be read, in official reports that were falsified or conveniently lost. This is how institutions protect themselves, by erasing proof, not just bodies. The missing children are not anomalies. They are footnotes in a pattern so consistent, so meticulous, that it cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Across centuries, wherever power consolidates under the guise of sanctity, records are manipulated, names vanish, events are sanitized, witnesses are coerced into silence or branded unreliable. The erasure is not sloppy. It is deliberate, surgical, designed to leave the public blind while insiders retain knowledge, control, and impunity. And these hidden documents tell a story more horrifying than any rumor. Letters between clerics and local authorities, now mostly destroyed, hinted at knowledge of chambers, rituals, and disappearances dating back generations. Some entries, smuggled from the archives by those brave or foolish enough to preserve them, describe methods for managing youth and preserving sanctity that echo practices from pagan temples and secret societies. The implication is undeniable. This was not a one-time crime. It was the continuation of an institutionalized pattern, an ongoing system of manipulation and exploitation carried out in plain sight. Look at it closely. The erasure of evidence is itself a mechanism of control. It shapes memory, dictates narrative, and enforces obedience. If no record exists, the public is powerless to question. If no body is found, grief is corralled, disbelief is enforced, and the machinery continues. This is the silent power of institutions, not only to harm, but to erase the harm in a way that protects themselves while punishing anyone who seeks truth. And now, as you hear this, understand the lesson. True power lies not in the ability to act, but in the ability to make acts invisible. Knowledge is dangerous because it pierces this invisibility. Seeing what was hidden, remembering what was erased, tracing the lineage of corruption. This is how the machinery can finally be understood and eventually dismantled. If you think this atrocity was confined to one town, one church, or even one generation, you are still seeing only the surface. The machinery behind the disappearance of those 50 children is not local. It is global. Across centuries, elites have maintained networks to protect, propagate, and perpetuate the same systems of control. Hidden alliances, cross-generational pacts, and coded correspondence ensured that wherever innocence existed, it could be mapped, monitored, and harvested. These networks are subtle, invisible, yet unbreakable to those who accept the surface of things. They operate through families, institutions, and religious authorities who share unspoken oaths, traditions, and methods. What looks like coincidence, nepotism, or bureaucracy is often a deliberate alignment of influence designed to safeguard secrecy. The same families who built churches, financed schools, and administered justice also maintained the machinery that orchestrated disappearances and erased evidence. Their reach is centuries old, their methods perfected over generations. Consider this: hidden codes in manuscripts, secret registers, and cryptic annotations in archives all hint at a system with memory, a system designed to survive exposure. Wherever these networks operate, missing children are rarely random. They are data points in a long-standing experiment of control. Their disappearances are recorded, cataloged, and often rationalized as divine will, civic duty, or moral correction. And the public, They remain blind, conditioned to trust the institutions that exploit them. What you are learning now is dangerous because it allows you to see the scope of complicity. This is not a tale of a few corrupted individuals. It is a system that transcends geography, politics, and time. The same methods used in one church were replicated elsewhere, adapted to culture, laws, and rituals, but always following the same principle: innocence is a resource, obedience is harvested, and power is maintained in silence. And now you can trace the lineage of this evil, not just to a building, or a town, or a century, but to a global network of influence that has survived wars, revolutions, and reforms. The pattern is unmistakable, terrifying, and deliberate. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Knowledge becomes both a weapon and a responsibility, and understanding the networks is the first step toward awakening a generation that has been conditioned to obey without question. Now you see the architecture. The crime was not random, the system not improvised. Ritual and secrecy were intertwined, forming a psychological cage that untrapped minds before it ever trapped bodies. Every hymn, every prayer, every repetition of sacred text was a thread in a network designed to normalize obedience, suppress curiosity, and cultivate fear. Children were taught to accept authority without question, and once authority is unquestioned, control becomes absolute. The rituals served two purposes. Outwardly, they signaled devotion and unity. Inwardly, they mapped behavior, conditioned loyalty, and implanted the mechanisms of compliance. Symbols, gestures, and words acted as triggers, subtle cues that dictated thought, emotion, and action. By the time the doors closed on that Sunday, the children were already psychologically prepared, primed to respond exactly as the system demanded. Their minds had been shaped long before the chamber beneath the floor became their tomb. Secrecy is the other pillar of control. The system relies not on force alone, but on invisibility. Hidden chambers, erased records, veiled rituals, all ensure that the machinery remains undetected. When combined with ritual, secrecy creates a reality where obedience feels natural, even sacred. The mind internalizes constraints as divine law. The body follows the commands of authority without question. Fear becomes a teacher and compliance a virtue. This is why institutions maintain appearances. Sanctuaries, schools, and homes built on trust become training grounds for the system. The public sees devotion, insiders see opportunity. Innocence is collected, manipulated, and sometimes destroyed, all under the guise of protection, guidance, or divine mandate. The machinery is invisible to those who accept the surface of reality, but for those who know how to look, the pattern is unmistakable: ritual, secrecy, total control. And now, as you follow this descent, understand the magnitude of what you are witnessing. The disappearance of 50 children is not merely a crime. It is a demonstration of how power exploits the most vulnerable, how obedience is manufactured, and how entire communities can be reshaped without their awareness. By tracing these patterns, you begin to see the invisible threads that govern behavior, shape perception, and maintain dominance across generations. You've seen the system, the rituals, the networks. But now you must understand the purpose. The 50 children did not vanish to satisfy random cruelty. They were harvested for obedience, for fear, for power. Their innocence was a resource, their trust a currency, their very presence a data point in a system designed to maintain dominance. Every scream suppressed, every smile cataloged, every prayer obeyed, fed a machine older than any institution, older than any law. Fear was the lever. Innocence was the tool. Together, they created a feedback loop that ensured the system's longevity. Children taught to fear their own curiosity, to obey without question, to internalize authority, became vessels carrying the machinery forward. Even after disappearance, the lessons they embodied rippled outward, shaping families, communities, and future generations. The crime was never merely physical. It was spiritual, psychological, systemic. And this harvesting was calculated. Leaders, clergy, and enforcers knew exactly what they were doing. They observed behavior, measured responses, and adjusted rituals accordingly. The chamber beneath the church was a final stage, but the conditioning began years before, invisibly, through doctrine, song, and subtle coercion. By controlling the mind, the system ensured that control over bodies would be effortless. Obedience was trained, fear was taught, compliance became instinct. The lesson for you listening now is chilling, Institutions, whether sacred or secular, are capable of similar harvesting even today. They rely on trust, familiarity, and routine to shape minds and enforce behavior. Every unchallenged authority, every unquestioned rule, every ritual you perform without understanding is a thread in the same architecture. It is how obedience is manufactured and how innocence is exploited. And as you follow this path of forbidden knowledge, recognize the stakes. Awareness is no longer passive. It is a declaration. By knowing the mechanics of this system, you are no longer a potential victim. You are awake, and awake men are dangerous to those who rely on silence and submission. Do not think that the chamber beneath that church was a relic of the past. The patterns that enabled the disappearance of 50 children are alive today, embedded in modern institutions, hidden behind charity, education, and civic authority. The machinery of control has evolved, refined, and adapted, but its core remains the same: obedience, fear, and exploitation. The same levers that bound those children now shape societies, workplaces, and communities without anyone noticing. Think about its standardized rituals, enforced routines, loyalty tests disguised as exams or evaluations, and the subtle social punishments for questioning authority. These are the modern echoes of ancient manipulation. Institutions teach conformity, reward compliance, and silence dissent. They collect data, monitor behavior, and shape thought, all without overt violence, but with precision just as deadly. Innocence may not vanish physically, but curiosity, autonomy, and critical thinking are harvested with efficiency. And the parallels are undeniable. Just as the church conditioned obedience through hymns and prayers, modern systems condition obedience through social norms, bureaucracy, and selective incentives. Fear is still the lever. Fear of shame, exclusion, failure, or punishment. And those in power, just like the elders in that church, are experts in perception. They know what to show, what to hide, what to rewrite, and how to ensure that the public sees only the version of reality they approve. The lesson is brutal and unavoidable. The machinery is not gone. It has simply adapted. Those who claim to protect, educate, or guide often serve the system itself. Innocence, compliance, and trust are still harvested, now disguised as merit, achievement, or devotion to rules. And those who notice, who question, or who resist are marginalized, discredited, or ignored, just as witnesses were silenced centuries ago. By seeing the continuity between past atrocities and modern systems, you begin to understand a fundamental truth. Power is maintained not by overt force alone, but by shaping perception, controlling belief, and harvesting obedience across generations. And once you see it, you can no longer participate unconsciously. Awareness is now your weapon, vigilance your shield, and knowledge your only true protection. Those who participate, willingly or unknowingly, in this machinery of control are not spared its consequences. Corruption does not only consume the innocent, it consumes the complicit, the men who orchestrated the disappearance of 50 children, the families who shielded them, the enforcers who upheld the system. All became prisoners of the very evil they wielded. Guilt, denial, and fear intertwined to form an invisible cage, one far more suffocating than any physical chamber. Power, when exercised without conscience, corrupts the spirit. Each act of concealment, each lie, each manipulation leaves an imprint. It is a slow poisoning, invisible yet undeniable. The priests, elders, and bureaucrats involved may appear respected, even sanctified, but their souls carry the weight of knowledge and complicity. And just as they harvest innocence, they harvest their own humanity, piece by piece, until the machinery sustains itself not just through obedience, but through internalized moral decay. Yet the system teaches them to ignore this, to rationalize their acts as necessary, sacred, or unavoidable. This is the brilliance of institutionalized evil. It cloaks its victims and its perpetrators alike in the illusion of righteousness. The moral rot is hidden beneath ritual, tradition, and the language of duty. It ensures that guilt is muted, conscience silenced, and accountability erased, while the cycle of control continues unbroken. For the innocent, the consequence is immediate and tangible. Bodies vanish, minds are warped, and futures are stolen. For the complicit, the consequence is subtler, but no less devastating: a slow erosion of integrity, a tightening of fear, a growing inability to distinguish right from convenient. Both victim and perpetrator become bound to the machinery, trapped in its orbit, often unaware of how deeply it has infiltrated their being. This is why understanding the system is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is a moral imperative. Awareness allows you to recognize the machinery in yourself, in others, and in institutions. It allows you to resist participation, to break cycles of obedience, and to protect innocence before it is consumed. And by seeing the cost of complicity, you begin to understand the full magnitude of what happened to those 50 children, and why their story is not just a warning, but a guide for survival. This is where the path diverges. Most men remain blind, following routines, obeying authority, and trusting institutions without question. But awareness, true unflinching awareness, is a weapon. When you recognize the machinery, you step outside its orbit. You see the rituals, the networks, the hidden chambers, and the patterns that harvest obedience and innocence. And once you see it, you can no longer participate unconsciously. You become dangerous to the system and dangerous to those who rely on your compliance. Awareness transforms you from a passive observer into an active participant in your own destiny. It does not make the world safer. It makes you vigilant. It does not undo the harm already done, but it allows you to protect what remains. You begin to discern signals from noise, truth from narrative, manipulation from guidance. You begin to recognize fear when it is planted, obedience when it is demanded, and conformity when it is manufactured. But this transformation is not comfortable. Seeing the machinery, tracing its patterns through history, and understanding its reach into modern life is a kind of death. The death of ignorance, the death of trust, the death of innocence in yourself. You carry the weight of knowledge that others cannot bear. And that weight is necessary, because only those who can bear it are capable of resisting the machinery. Only those who confront the darkness can protect themselves and others from being consumed. And here is the final secret. The machinery depends on silence. It thrives on the passive, the obedient, the unquestioning. Speaking, remembering, recognizing, and acting, all of these disrupt its patterns. Every insight, every connection, every refusal to comply weakens its power. And you, having reached this point, have the capacity to act, to awaken others, and to break the cycle. You have stepped out of the current that sweeps the unsuspecting, and you carry the awareness that can prevent it from claiming more victims. Remember the phrase you wrote earlier, the one you repeated in the comments. I see the hidden hand. Twice. That is not just ritual. It is affirmation, a seal on your awareness. A recognition that you have crossed into a realm of understanding few dare to enter, and that you are now equipped to navigate, resist, and survive the machinery that has claimed countless lives across centuries. Now you stand at the edge of understanding. 50 children vanished. Yes! But what you have witnessed is far greater than any single atrocity. You have seen the machinery itself, the hidden hand that bends obedience, harvests innocence, and thrives on silence. You have traced it from ancient temples to modern institutions, observed its rituals, uncovered its networks, and glimpsed the cost of complicity. And you understand with chilling clarity that this is not history alone. It is a living system, operating all around you, in ways subtle and absolute. Most men will never see what you have seen. Most will continue their lives blind, trusting the structures that exist to control them, surrendering their autonomy without realizing it. But you are different. You have stepped beyond fear, beyond conformity, and beyond the comforting illusions that hide the machinery in plain sight. Knowledge has marked you. Awareness has armed you. And that mark is not easily erased. The final truth is this: power does not obey morality. Authority does not answer to conscience. Systems of control, whether cloaked in religion, government, or culture, operate on efficiency, secrecy, and obedience. The machinery harvests compliance, manipulates perception, and erases resistance. Those 50 children were not lost because the world is careless. They were taken because the system is deliberate, relentless, and eternal. And it continues today, unseen, unchallenged, unless men like you stand and recognize it. Do not underestimate the weight of what you now carry. You have been awakened to knowledge that changes perception forever. The machinery will attempt to blind you again, to pull you back into the current of obedience, but you cannot unsee it. You cannot forget it. You are now a guardian of awareness, a witness to forbidden truths, and a threat to any system that relies on silence. And so, remember your declaration, repeated in the comments twice. I see the hidden hand, twice. Let it resonate. Let it lock your awareness, your vigilance, and your refusal to comply blindly. The world you inhabit will never feel the same again. You have descended into darkness, and in that darkness, you now carry the light of truth, a light that will forever illuminate the machinery, the patterns, and the hidden atrocities of power. This knowledge is dangerous. It changes men, and once it has changed you, nothing, no institution, no ritual, no authority, can claim your obedience without your choice. You are awake, you are armed, and you are no longer alone.